Good morning, and welcome to the daily live event, live on Fridays on LinkedIn and throughout the week on Facebook and YouTube. You can visit 7stepreset.com and you'll get those channels. Usually it's at 7 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. Today, I'm going to share a few of the levers that I use with clients to develop self mastery. You'll hear steps and phrases, and it may feel like a lot. But the goal is simplicity on the other side of complexity, not on this side. Otherwise, we're not building capability, we're collecting hacks. I'll start with the current situation through my lens. Uh, we're living through two forces of change that are compounding at the same time. First, the global environment is becoming less predictable. Power blocks are shifting, trade relationships are being rewritten, currency systems, supply chains, and political incentives are moving. And that's a big one because as incentives move, behavior changes. And in unpredictable ways because there are always people looking to game the system. Whether you're a business owner, a leader, or a professional, you don't get to opt out. The world is more connected than ever, so volatility travels faster, hits deeper, and forces adaptation even in places that used to feel stable. Second, technology capability is accelerating, not in a steady line, but in compounding waves. We're on the very steep part of the curve, the vertical part where disruption stops being occasional and starts feeling constant. What used to take years now happens in months. Business models appear, dominate, and fade faster than most people can update their thinking. And here's the part that matters: when the external world becomes less stable, the internal world becomes more important because the real risk isn't just external pressure, it's internal load. It's what happens when the volume of incoming stimulus exceeds your ability to stay regulated and your system starts collapsing. A stimulus response cycle gets collapsed into a stimulus reaction cycle. At that point, the threat doesn't even need to be out there. Your own catastrophized interpretation becomes the stimulus. And we've all felt that where we're focusing on the things that we worry about and they just keep escalating and escalating. Meanwhile, the external threat hasn't changed at all. But our dysregulation has increased. And now you're reacting to what you're imagining, not what's actually happening. So the question isn't just what's changing, it's how do you stay coherent while everything changes around you? My answer: you build agency and personal leadership because you can't stop the thousands of stimulus response cycles happening inside you each day, but you can train them. You can update autopilot so they work for you instead of seemingly against you. You can expand the gap between stimulus and reaction, and you can build the ability to insert a pause, engage the conscious mind, and choose the next response on purpose, reliably. So your response does not equal your reaction. Consider it this way: 95% of what we do is by habit, and the external world isn't just changing. Sometimes the rules for what's acceptable are changing week to week. That's what we're going to map today. The reason I started like to start with my own lens through my lens, and this is not in any way suggesting that you adopt this same point of view. There are many different backdrops that you can have to use as your narrative of what's likely to come. But if I used to work with the guy and he would say it depends on what you want to believe, and it kind of bugged me because I said, well, we should believe what's true. But when you start working into the unknown, that makes sense. It depends on what you want to believe. It's not what you want to believe about what is. That we already know. You can prove that. We're talking about what do you think is coming. So you have to gather the data. And if you think about how often people will disagree with something, and it has to do more with their time horizon rather than the thing itself. So what I look at this, there's two major factors I focus on that regardless of what happens, these things are long term cycles. One is an 80-year cycle that's underway already, and one is a 50 plus year cycle that's underway. So these aren't going to change overnight. They're probably not going to change in the next 5 years, next 10, next 15 years. So I use them as backdrops and I adjust. So this way, I'm not responding or reacting to every piece of news that comes through, what I'm doing is I can just check and say, has this changed my model of the future? If it has, I can adjust. If it hasn't, I just keep moving on. So what we're going to do is look at the two areas, and you can Google this first one, and I encourage you to do so. I'm going to use from I'm going to take this from Ray Dalio's Changing World Order. In his book, Changing World Order, he talks about how world orders, the world superpower has changed over time. So currently, the United States is the world superpower, and it kind of coincides with the world currency. And before that, you had Great Britain. Before that, you had the Dutch. Before that, you had the Spanish and Spain and Portugal. And before that, you had the Ottoman Empire and a few others. So it was actually multipolar back when. So this is what he uses on the cover of his book. It's kind of a diagram, and this is what he's talking about. So as one world superpower changes or comes into play, another one goes out. And this is the US. This would be Great Britain. This would be the Dutch. And this would be Spain and Portugal. Now, the way he did this, he went back more than just a few centuries because he looked at China and how those empires rose and fell and how they were replaced. And he said that this pattern has continued and I encourage you to look at the video. So if you go to Changing World Order on YouTube, there's two videos. One video is 45 minutes long, and that's a more in-depth version. But then the book goes way deeper in depth. And then you also have another video that's about four and change, maybe 4 minutes, 50 seconds. And that's a good summary. So it'll kind of give you enough information to understand this, and also give you enough information to know if you want to go into the 45-minute video. And for me, it was enough for me to go through the whole book. And there's a lot in there. It's eye-opening, and you can't unsee it, which is why I use it as a backdrop. So if we just take where we are now, and these are 80-year cycles, by the way, 80 and change, plus or minus, right? 80-year cycles. And if you look at just the US, which is where we are, by the way, under Great Britain, so we have the US dollar is the USD. Of course, we had the uh, pound sterling, we had the guilder under the Dutch, and I'm not sure what it was under Spain and Portugal. But the point is this: check it out. This is a multipolar, and the one before that was multipolar. So the world wasn't as globally connected, and so you had two that were powerful. When you look at the Dutch and the Great Britain, these countries were all over the world, colonizing islands and other countries, etc. Which is why the currency, it made sense. The currency became the reserve currency because they had so much property under them. And same with the Great Britain. Then we had World War II, and Great Britain was in debt. And to get out of that, the U.S. helped them, and in the process, U.S. became the new world order, the new superpower. If you look at just the U.S., what you have is 6 stages. He talks about this in the book, 6 stages, and we're somewhere around stage 5 of 6 in the decline. We left 4. We were probably in 4 when he wrote the book. It was the in 2020, I believe, end of 20, and then beginning of 2021, somewhere around there. And we were in finishing up stage 4. If you look at this, if you think of this as an economic cycle, which is what he's using, because he was the money manager, a money management firm, Bridgewater. And if you look at this as an economic cycle, and it has to do with debt, etc., you can see that in the beginning of this 80-year cycle, all you had to do was show up. Everything was getting better. The population was growing because you had the baby boom going, right? The baby boom started in 1946. and ended in baby boom went from about 1946 to about 1964. So you could say that almost like from here, if that's 20 years or so, you can say that was the first stage. It coincided with the first stage. So you had all you had to do was show up. And a lot of changes happened in there. We had assassination of President Kennedy in the US. We had assassination of Robert Kennedy, assassination of Martin Luther King, assassination of Malcolm X. So there was a lot of change going on, a lot of turmoil. Then you have your other stages. We are in the decline, and because we're in the decline, the momentum is not in the favor of growth, obviously. And what we're looking at is what happens here. And so you see consolidation. I say if you look closely, you'll see what looks like money grabs and power grabs going on. It explains, in my view, why you're seeing this shift to oligarchy. And one of the things that using a backdrop like this does is here we learn to just wait, just hang in there. Oh yeah, we don't like what you see, just hang in there. It'll get better. Don't like what you see, just hang in there. That worked all the way up to here. And then around this point in time, somewhere around the 2008 crisis, that didn't work so well anymore. But you could still do it. I remember when I started the motorcycle business, I had people would come and tell me, "Oh yeah, what you should do is find somebody, find one of your competitors, look what they're doing, do what they're doing, and then charge a lower price." That was the mantra. That's how you started a business before, because you had the population growing. You just needed to get your foot in the door. Lower price was it. It doesn't work anymore. It doesn't work because information is happening so fast and the landscape is changing so fast. So if you do what your competitors are doing, you're already outdated before you start. Now, I'm going to redraw this diagram because we don't really know what's going to happen. If you read the book, it's kind of it's intense. Stage 6 is pretty intense. So let's say we're here, stage 5, somewhere in stage 5. We don't know what's going to happen. Meanwhile, you have China rising. And even Ray even talks about this in the book. When you talk about China rising, you it sort of triggers this fanboy response where people are looking at the same way a person will look at their team, and even though the team has a losing record for the season, they're still all in on the team, and this is going to happen, and that's going to happen. You kind of feel like that happens. They immediately look at, yeah, but China can't do this, and China can't do that, and the U.S. is doing this. Meanwhile, China's just one foot in front of the other, steady. Their production and manufacturing, what we did in the early parts here, China's doing now. Just Google some of the infrastructure. Google amazing infrastructure in China. It's amazing what's going on there. But I don't want to make it about China and the U.S. And I think that's part of the challenge is that people do that. We don't know what's going to happen after, right? We don't really know. This is just a likely backdrop, a probable backdrop that I use to navigate a world of change so I'm not getting whipsawed. I do. So my narrative says that where these things usually end in wars, I do believe there's enough aversion to war and things are getting splintered that what's going to happen is we will end up with, and I don't know how it's going to look, but I say we'll end up with a multipolar environment. And we might even have another one come up because it's watching what's going on here. China's heavy into infrastructure. You now have artificial intelligence accessible to anyone and it's getting cheaper. Just think about how many new AIs have come up in the last 4 years. And the latest one was a fraction. I'm talking single digit percentage of the cost of the first one. So you can see this is just going to expand. So you have other countries that are mineral rich, they have rare earth, what they call rare earths, but resources, and who knows what's going to happen. So I can easily see where there will be a multipolar view. But we don't know what this is. We do know this, though. We do know that right now you have the US and you have the dollar as the reserve currency. And that's been propped up with what's called the petrodollar because all trade for oil had to be done in dollars, but that's changing. And one of the things that's changing is now you have BRICS. And while this was Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, you now have more countries getting on board with BRICS. And you're seeing oil traded in BRICS. And there's other currencies. There are other countries creating currencies because you can do that with artificial intelligence, technology, the speed of apps being built. A country can come from nowhere to being a world on the world stage because of their resources. And the other thing that's happening is we're making a shift. This is all my view, but it aligns with what Ray Dalio is talking about. You have a shift from fiat currency back to the gold standard. Now, I say these are shifts. Who knows where we are on the, I mean, look at the price, how gold has been shifting for the last 15 years. So we don't know how long these things are going to take. But this shift does happen in a way that tells me other countries who have a lot of minerals, gold, etc., in their land, they can become a player. And there's a it's worth it's worth remembering that when you take something change, and you can talk about change, leadership, and critical mass, but what happens is the way I look at change, and you could go back in history and you can see that in the beginning it's like tearing. You ever take a cloth and you're trying to get through that first seam and you tear and you're tearing and you're making progress and you just keep doing it. This is like the flywheel, right? You just keep showing up, and then it tears. And that is why I have the backdrop, because when that tear happens, I already know where to go. I already know what to do. I The way I used to look at it was I didn't really care about politics. I just shifted my strategies depending on who was in office and who was in control. And you just shift your strategies. If this person's in control, here's where you go. If that person's or this party's in control, you do this. If that one's in control, you do what. And it worked. I didn't have to pay attention to politics. But now things are changing so fast. Like I said, sometimes week to week, you do have to pay attention. But having this backdrop helps me. The other backdrop I use is the technology. So I remember in 2000, around the time remember around the time of the dot-com bubble, there was a lot of talk about how technology capacity is doubling every 18 months. It initially started at every 12 months back in 1967. It was Gordon Moore, Intel, was saying this because they're able to pack more processing into chips. So chips kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller, which is why you went from computers that took up the whole room to now computing power in your pocket. And then that shifted to the internet, and continued to grow. And now we're looking at chips being the driver of artificial intelligence and data centers, et cetera. But if you look at a compound curve, take any compound curve, it goes and then it does this. So if you took $1,000 and you doubled it, and you double it 10 times, at the fifth year, it's only $32,000. By the 10th year, it's $1 million. It's the power of compounding. very similar to the example I was using. It's moving along, it's moving along, it's moving along, it's moving along, and then bam. And that's what happens in 10 years of doubling. So imagine how many doublings we've had since 1970. Now, who knows? Is it really doubling every 18 months? Is it really doubling every 24 months? Who knows? But the point is, it's doubled a lot. And right now, we're in the very steep part of the curve and have been on the very steep part of the curve, which is why there's all these technology solutions, they get replaced, which is why I focus on let's make sure we know the fundamentals. You have the underlying, and you're able to do that because as technology changes, your fundamentals don't change at the principle level. If you build your business and strategies based on principles, the principles are going to stay. Like gravity, we know that gravity is going to be there, and if it changes, we have other problems. So you focus on principles and let the VUCA and the BANI do their thing of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And then the brittle, what is it? Brittle, anxiousness, BANI, nonlinear, and incomprehensible. Yeah. So you have those two things going on. People are talking about that now. And but if you stay with principles, you'll stay inside that zone, and you know that you can prevail, and that's the point here. We can prevail, but you have to keep taking action. And I say take principled action, action based on principles. The other thing I would offer is that, and I talked about it here. So then you had the Xers. So this was the boomer. Then you had the Gen Xers, and that lasted until about 1980. And these are give or take because you can actually find different years, but it's directionally correct. And those are the Xers. And then you had the Y, and that was 1996 or so. And I didn't draw it exactly to match this, as you can see. And this was Y, or better known as millennials. And then you had, let's give it Gen Z, which is, I think, 2005. And then you have Generation Alpha, which from there to present, that's what's in play now. So your Gen Zs are now entering into the workplace, and you're seeing it happen. You're seeing the shifts that Gen Z is making as they enter the workplace. Excuse me. The same way we saw shifts when the boomers entered the workplace. There were major shifts going on, and this is like a bubble that's been going through the years, through the generations, and the peak of the baby boom was 64. So there were still a lot of boomers and there were X's, right? But there was this still continued, this kind of a blob continued in this context. The context I'm talking about is you were going along and then you have this big blob of people, right? Then you have another one, and this would be the Xers. And then you have the millennials, and the millennials were bigger than the Xers as a group and smaller than the boomers. And then you have Gen Z. And if you look at it, there are business models that have just followed this group. If you look at money management, if you look at right now, I was just on the road the other day and I saw a car with steer lifts. So they go out and install steer lifts in homes. Why? Because you're getting this. The scooters, right? The scooters that you can go around with. I see people using these scooters on the sidewalk. And they've now turned into little cars. They've got four wheels, a person sitting up in the car. They drive it on the sidewalk to go shopping. This is happening, and now you're seeing the Gen Z and the Gen Z, and you look at how many other kind of scooters, electric scooters, people are using for transport. So before, as a boomer, you want to get a car. Now I'm seeing so many people. The scooter is enough transportation, and they can do it because they keep their circle, or they keep their where they have to go kind of small. So I said there's two major shifts that are occurring, and I don't look at the generations as a major shift the way I used to. Before, you could slip the peak of the baby boomers 47 years, and you could predict some of the economic shifts because when you slip that 47 years, it coincided with the S&P 500. Why? Because at 47, for boomers anyway, we were spending the most amount of money in our lifetime at 47 on average. And it makes sense because you had more, the biggest home, you had the most amount of cars, probably the most amount of family members in college and those things. So it just, and then after that, it went into more savings. So the spending peak was 47 years old, and it just so happened that, not just so happened, it drove it. It coincided with the S&P 500. That dropped off, and that peak ended in 2010, which is probably what triggered the 2008 crisis, which was a little bit early compared to that. But I don't use the demographics anymore for that kind of a pre- forecast. People do pay attention to it. What we'll do now is we'll take a look at some of these drivers and levers that I use to, and it's more of a coaching model. This is more of a coaching model that I use. It's, and which is why I go into so much detail. And if when you look at this, because I do break things down into steps and phases and areas, if you look at it as this is learning, it's the same way you learn math in bits and pieces, and then you pull it together, and now you know algebra and trigonometry and calculus. But it was these little pieces that you had to put together, and if you miss the little pieces, then you're going to be lost at the macro. Just it's just one way of looking at it. Not only that, it's very difficult to change things at the summary level. What I mean by that is if you consider personality and identity, those are summaries, those are constructs. They're constructs of and summaries of multiple elements. If I told you to do something in the physical realm, in exercise or athletics, you kind of know what you have to do. You have to change the bits and pieces to get there. You maybe nutrition, maybe you have to strengthen the smaller muscles, maybe you have to use proper form, you have to do these things. You're not going to get to max lifts with sloppy form, for example. So you do those pieces, and it makes sense. If you're playing sports, in order to do a certain kind of pivot or a certain kind of move, you have to do the elements and build it up the same way people learn to to do skateboard tricks. So you don't do it at the summary level, you do it at the elements level. But then if I say, okay, well, you can do the same thing with personality, that may not click because your personality is something we thought we just can't change, because most of the time we're trying to change it at the construct level. And there's a lot of hacks out there that work to change personality, think idiosyncrasies that are involved in that identity. And there are a lot of hacks out there. And the reason hacks don't work is because you're fighting against the 95% of everything we do is done by habit. And that has to do with 100 billion neurons connected to 1,000 and 10,000 other neurons, and they're firing and wiring, and the ones that fire together wire together, but the ones that are wired together also fire together. So you have all this cross connection, trillions and trillions of connections. And so when you introduce a hack, what happens is the brain is efficient and it's always working to get back to efficiency, which is why you have plateaus when you lift weights or exercise. Those plateaus are really the brain becoming and the nervous system becoming efficient. And so it drops off the neurotransmitters, it drops the signal. So part of that plateau is the signal getting weaker or stabilizing. But when you're on the new part of a routine, that's why you change the routine up every 8 weeks or so. When you're in the new part of the routine, you're getting more neurotransmitter flowing in there because that's how the brain works. And with that additional neurotransmitter, you can get another spurt. So fitness trainers know that's coming and they preempt it, which is why when you work with a trainer, you'll get much bigger, much faster, or much stronger, much faster, because they're playing the homeostasis, allostasis, and they're building it for allostasis. So instead of waiting till you level off and then trying to do something, they know it's coming. So they just introduce a different kind of routine and a different kind of routine. And you create this stability, but with allostasis. You see the same thing with through hikers. These are the people who hike from Mexico to Canada, for example. And if you look at them in the beginning, they'll hike maybe 8 to 10 miles a day, and you can tell it's a lot. But in the middle of the hike, they're doing 20 miles a day, and by the end, 30, and some of them are doing 40 miles a day. Consider a marathon, 26 miles a day. They're barely sleeping. They're doing 40 miles a day, and they're doing it day after day after day. Maybe they'll take a break a day or two, but they can easily do 10 days in a row. 30 is what I see more with the bell curve, the middle of the bell curve. But they've gone from 8 a day to 30 a day over a 90-day period because it's the allostasis. Their whole body is just generating that signal. It's more to I can go a lot deeper, but I bring that up because when you are developing people in business, you want to consider that your development plan should include some allostasis. You should include a view of allostasis and build that into your development plan, so you're not having your people plateau. This is how you keep the energy going. This is how you build high performing teams. All right, so let's do this. Get the show on the road with the slides. This four pillars of self mastery. I go live every day, Monday to Friday. Fridays on LinkedIn, other days on Facebook and YouTube. And you can go to 7stepreset.com to get more information about that, schedules and things like that. And you can also, if you want to ask questions, you can also jump in here and use that link. It's rather than try to copy the link, just this in the comments or chat, depending on what platform you're on. I'll go through a quick run through. The 7 performance areas is the big roll up. This is what I'm working towards. These are the 7 areas that you want to pay attention to, and I suggest doing 2 or 3 at a time. Once you get stabilized, if you're moving towards stability, or once you get to your on track to your new quest. But I also look at it as mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional. These are in our control. Relationship, professional, financial require involvement of other people. The be, do, have is the identity shift. You make the identity shift first. You have to become that person for your quest first. We have to get a handle on emotional, and that's in our control, even if you think it's not. You have, and we'll talk about that today. It's also the place where people can hijack you. This is the place where people can take control of you because of the buttons they can push. What you have to do is make sure you're managing your life, agency, and personal leadership in such a way so this is not available to people to hijack you. And that's very doable. We'll talk about it today. And then you have the relationship, professional, and financial. This is aligned with emotional intelligence. And I put this slide up there because it is 4 pillars of self mastery is foundational for dynamic leadership. And I want to make sure we're bringing the goodness of emotional intelligence along. There's nothing bad about emotional intelligence at all. It's part of the dynamic leadership. The difference is that when emotional intelligence was developed, created and developed, they didn't have the tools to for the brain scanning to see what was actually going on with habit. And when I look at emotional intelligence, it's evident that they were still thinking of the subconscious as a mind, and you see things. You can't change your personality. They'll say things like that. You can't change your intelligence. Well, you know now that those terms are not true. It's nothing to take away from emotional intelligence. It's just like a emotional intelligence 2.0 or 3.0, where you are now saying that you can change those things. It's called neuroplasticity, and you execute on neuroplasticity with deep practice. So it is a process and it's a strategy, and you can learn it, but you have to learn the bits and pieces, which is why I break things down. You try to learn it at the summary level, you'll think you already understand neuroplasticity, and you'll just lump it into old efforts to change your habits, and you'll get back to the same old thing. You go to a seminar, you get jacked up, you do the or hyped up, and you do something well, and then it wears off and you do it again. That's not the way life has to be. You can change your brain for sure. Then, so I broke it down into these are the 7 steps. We do this 33,000 times a day, roughly. If you look up how many decisions you make a day, you'll see something like 33,000. And that's where that's coming from. And most of those are stimulus response cycles. It makes sense because 95% of everything we do is done by habit. So you could see 30, 31,000, and that's average. Some people have more, some people have less. I'll say when you go through and build agency and personal leadership, you'll have far fewer than 30,000 because there's going to be a lot of things you just ignore. They just don't, they're not worth it. Most of your threats are tiger levels, are assumed to be tiger level threats. And we just don't have that many and that many serious threats. I mean, how many people have existential threats in a year, every year, right? You may have had one or two in your lifetime, maybe four or five if you're in certain countries. Obviously, there's risks of many more, but generally speaking, in business, we just don't have those. Life or death, and even existential mean going out of business is not the end of life. So we have these 7 steps. This is think of this as your conditioning and development. This is staying regulated and coherence. So if you have coherence, then you're going to be ready for the next stimulus. And this is where I say you want to be regulated all the time because you don't know what's coming next. Whereas this 33,000 was more of a horizontal line. Now this thing is a sloping up line. So you don't know what's coming next and you have to be ready for it. And the way to be ready for it is to have coherence, being regulated 100% of the time. This is your stimulus response, stimulus reaction. And I break it out from the response. And this is the response. This is the check in case you needed emotional modulation. So if you're getting hijacked, you can modulate in real time, anywhere from a second to 90 seconds. You modulate and you're not hijacked or triggered when you're taking action. That's why I have step 5. It's a check in. You don't always have to use it. And the better job you do over here, the less often you'll be using this. Step 6 is action. You're going to take the reaction that was recommended. You're going to do it, delay it, delegate it, or discard it. You'll probably modify it, and that happens here. So we'll talk about that a little bit today. And then step 7 is return to presence. I also think of it as mindfulness. So these are the 3 steps we're talking about today. Your coherence, step 2, your autopilot reaction. We're going to upgrade the autopilot, talk about upgrading the autopilot, and that's how you create automaticity that's aligned with your quest or your purpose. And then we have the conscious response, which is where your conscious mind gets involved. So this right here is the battle. The half second is the battle. Most people think it's over here. They keep getting more and more knowledge. They rely on insights. But I'm going to show you why that is good to get knowledge and information, and you need that to have the skills to develop what you're going to do and what's your next step. But this is the battle because this battle is happening in the network of neurons. This is energy flowing through the neural pathways. Remember, there's trillions of connections, and that energy is going through not at the speed of light, but that's what drives the speed of life, processing 11 million bits per second. The conscious mind processes 50 bits per second, to put that in perspective. So this is like hyper speed information coming in, which is why it has to get filtered. And this is where the autopilot comes in because you can upgrade the autopilot here so that what gets recommended here is more aligned with your quest. Otherwise, what gets recommended from here to here is more like what you learned from 0 to 7. And if you're over 50, your life is completely different than it was from age 0 to 7. So the reason why we want to stay regulated and maintain coherence is because we want to go from a regulated state where you have steps 1, 2, 3, and then 4 to 7, you return to mindfulness and presence so you can do it again. This is what we want to do, whether it's a 10,000 or 30,000, you want this in place. And this is a second. This happens in a second. It's not something that's like minutes, right? It's a second. And if you're awake 65,000 seconds a day and you're making 30,000 decisions a day, that's a decision every other second, or stimulus response cycle every other second. So this is happening very quickly. And this happens, then the next one happens, and then the next one happens. You want to keep this. This is what it looks like to be regulated. This is what it looks like when you're not regulated or dysregulated, because you've collapsed and gotten rid of steps 1 and 2 and 4 to 7, and your reaction from the prior stimulus reaction becomes the stimulus for the next stimulus reaction cycle. And this is what triggered looks like. You see the person catastrophizing. This is that internal load. This is when an external threat triggered them into internal catastrophization. And when they trigger into internal catastrophization, they're only looking inside. This is why they say if you're in your head, you're dead. That's, I think, what that means, how that terminology came about. But the point is, you are escalating it yourself. All these worries, and because neurons that fire together wire together, and vice versa, they're coming up and just adding. And what about this thing? And look at that thing, and that's going to happen. Next thing you know, people have stacked It could be an A-B decision, and they don't like A and they don't like B, the outcome, and they've stacked A and B, and then they've added C because of the downside of both of those. And now that combination added another one. But the reality is they have an A-B decision, or they can do nothing. So there's many other choices. And the point is you're never going to have the A and B downside at the same time in this example. So this is why you can't just be looking inside. You have to have a way to come out of it. That's what we're going to, the terminology we'll use there is internal load. So internal load versus external threat. External pressure, that's the outside in. And if you use an example, let's say that you get a bad email that causes, is going to cause some downstream pressure, you may get heightened, it may be stressed, but there's only one email. And then after that, you can go to internal load, which is inside out, and the system was activated. So now it's looking for something to react to. And guess what? If your system is looking for something to react to, it's going to find it, because from the initial external threat, your breathing may have gotten shallow. You may have clenched your fist. You may have tightened your jaw. Your neck muscles may have tightened. You may be bringing in your vision. Those are all signals that something is stressful. So the system, the internal system, keeps looking and it keeps finding things. And then it's going to justify, well, why am I this stressed? Something's going on. Oh, it must be that thing. Yeah, it must be that thing. And now you've stacked the A and the B and the C and the D and the E, right? And it's none of those are happening. There's only one threat. So if you can stay regulated, you're dealing with that one threat, and you can choose to delay it or delegate it or deal with it another time or just ignore it. So you have internal load versus external threat. The agency equals the capacity to choose state, meaning, and action under pressure. That's why I talk about doing this amidst chaos, because many people can be regulated when it's calm. That was my strategy before. I wanted to always be regulated. So what I did was I managed my entire environment. And you hear about some celebrities doing this, movie actors and things like that, where they won't let people look them in the eye. They won't let people be around them when they're on set because they're staying inside of a zone. The point is, this works until it doesn't. And if you are basing your agency and personal leadership and your quote unquote regulation and coherence on controlling your environment, then eventually when something does break through, man, it's like the floodgates, because you don't have the skills to manage it. That's not been has not been a muscle. So we want to make sure we exercise that muscle. And the moment you can say this is internal load or this is just activation, not danger, you're going to start pulling out of that. And you can do things like look around, you can go through a doorway, you can go outside, you can play music, you can work on something else, you can put it in a box, figuratively or mentally. Right? You can write that down, make a note to yourself, and put an alarm. And now you're going to deal with something at 3 p.m. today, and here's what you're going to think about. So you structure it and you put it over there. That's to delay it, and that way you stop that internal load from escalating. So this is the preview of the different phases we'll talk about. The You have threat calibration, that's phases 1, 2, 3, and then you have recovery speed, and you have training and encoding. But let's look at it. External pressure drives the spike amplitude, how high. Internal load drives the baseline elevation, which is why I use the word coherent, because if this is what you're doing inside, if you're elevating your baseline, then the next threat that comes in, you're already hyper. It's so easy for you to fall into the trap of catastrophizing because you already have an elevated baseline. And the internal load management reduces sensitivity and reactivity, frequency and amplitude amplification. So the internal load actually contributes to the amplitude of those spikes. Now we have words as tools. This is one of the drivers. I If you listen to yourself talk, it's one way to calibrate where you are from a self-image standpoint. And that self-image could change. One of the things we do in step 2 is it's a check-in. Am I regulated? And if you're one of the ways to stay regulated is watch yourself talk. There's 3 kinds of self-talk, and if you can go through them. So one is you're just degrading yourself. You're saying I'm stupid. There's another kind that's talking about the mistakes that you made. Well, it's wisdom. And so you don't want to let that one take hold. And you know you're not stupid because of you did this and you did this and you did this. And the mistakes, yeah, you have to make mistakes to grow. So that's wisdom. And then the other one is just bad luck. You're in the wrong place and something happened, and you can't control it other than not being there. But some things happen. It's the flip of a coin. So once you process those and move them on, because that self-talk, a lot of times that's emotion driven, and emotion driven is to teach you something. So if you can turn that into a learning moment and say, okay, what did I learn from that, instead of the self-talk continuing. Some people use the same exact self-talk lines that came from their parents or themselves for decades. So that's one way and then transformational vocabulary is something else. Transformational vocabulary is a way that you can take words, because words have associations and associations can connect to emotions, and this gives you the ability to change. By changing the word, you change the associations, and by changing the associations, you change which neurons fire and which neural pathways fire. It doesn't happen necessarily overnight, although you can change your word from "I'm so angry." Were you really angry? Are you really angry, or are you just annoyed? Yeah, it's more like annoyed. Or that's terrible. That's going to be the worst thing. Is it really the worst thing, or is it just inconvenient right now? Yeah, you're right. It's inconvenient. Now, sometimes you say, no, it's the worst thing. And, you use a different strategy. But the point being is when you say, yeah, you're right. It's just an inconvenience. You'll see the person's shoulders drop. You'll see them relax. You'll see their breathing return to normal. So it's a way to keep your nervous system in performance mode. The wrong words escalate threat. The right words preserve options. When I first learned this back in 1990, I changed rejection to unappreciated, and I changed embarrassment to amusing. I changed overwhelmed to time to chunk to rechunk, because the mind can hold 7 to 9 chunks of information at a time, and obviously if you're being overwhelmed, you're probably running out of chunk space. That's just my example, but there's more. You can look up transformational vocabulary, but here's a slide on it. It's a curated set of words and phrases, and this is just touching the tip of the iceberg. Threat language equals performance, shifting to performance language, from identity language to task language, from global language to specific language. And here's some examples using levels. Level one, I'm stressed, or you could say I'm under pressure, I'm stretched thin, I'm overloaded. So these are like the levels. Like 4 out of 10 is I'm under pressure. 10 out of 10, I'm beyond capacity. I'm at the risk of bad decisions. And by having just the stratification here, by having these different categories, so you shift from, I'm dying to, I'm just under a little pressure. You don't want to have everything. You don't want to be using the same exact words for little things as you do for big things. If it was an existential crisis and use this phrase, and now you're using it every day, you're bringing in that same kind of emotion. This is no woo woo. This is no mystical stuff. It's just that neurons that fire together wire together, and uh, that causes things. I'm overwhelmed is another one. So 4 out of 10, I have a lot of emotion. I'm at capacity. I'm saturated. I need sequencing. Here's where you want to start taking action, but you don't want to be using I'm flooded. I need a reset. Or I'm overwhelmed. You don't want to be using that for little things that come up. You just don't. If you have thousands of stimuli that hit you every single day, where they tell me that anywhere from 5,000 to 10,000 ad stimuli per day. It's probably more than that now, because that was from a few years ago. So you don't want to be, and though a lot of those ads have fear-based headlines. And then the last one is they disrespected me. That didn't land well. That felt dismissive. That hit a boundary for me. That's a relationship rupture. So again, here you need to pay attention. Here you need to start taking action. Here you need to change your strategy. And then autopilot. So this is the autopilot that creates the automaticity. This is the automatic thing that happens when you are going through a stimulus response cycle. And what I'll do is shift to here. So this is the first few phases of the stimulus response. Remember, I said that 1 second is the battle. That's what we're talking about here. So that first, I meant the first half second. The first half second is the battle. That's what we're talking about here. This is the stimulus. This is when something comes in. But the brain and nervous system, they were already pre-listening. They were looking at what's possible in this situation. Every time you go through a door, every time you go to another setting, every time you walk into a room, every time you change your scenery, the brain and nervous system are predicting what might happen. So it narrows it down. And if you are walking around in a threat all the time, then every scene looks like threat. That's why hiking is such a cool exercise to do, because you're not seeing old things, you're seeing new things. You're able to clear your mind and stop some of that chatter. So the first 100 milliseconds, you have this initial detection, and then you have rapid appraisal. This is important because this first quarter of a second, so you got the stimulus, you have the first quarter of a second. This is what we think of as reaction time before the subconscious, or an AKA network of neurons, comes online. So, in other words, it's already been working. It's looking at cognitive biases, it's looking at meta programs, it's looking at path of least resistance, it's looking at habits, it looks at what was like this before and what did you do. And that hands off to the subconscious. So it's already gathered this information. It's like data gathering. Then it gives to the subconscious at the reaction time, quarter of a second, and the subconscious formulates the reaction. It forms the reaction that it's going to give to the conscious mind. And meanwhile, the preconscious is surfacing. So this is happening at the 500 millisecond mark. And here's an important point: the conscious mind cannot perceive the signal accurately that's going through the neural pathway. So part of this process is to change from a neural pathway signal to a construct that can be perceived by the conscious mind. And that construct, again, is a summary, and it feels like truth because it came from you. That's why the philosophers thought that this was a mind, because they thought it was coming from you. It's kind of coming from you, but it's coming from your associations from the past. So it's not coming from the conscious you, it's coming from a habitual set of associations that have formed a system of here's what we think is going on, and that feels like truth. And then you have your conscious mind. So this was step three. This was step three. The first half second that I say is where the battle is. So you fix this, you start fixing the rest of it. When I say fix, getting aligned with your purpose and quest. Then we have the conscious mind. So you have conscious engagement. You have, and this is that first, like you have the preconscious surfacing. Now the conscious mind is involved. And here's what I say: I think that at this point, if you're flying an airplane in an unfamiliar area, you have to land on a grass field that looks like a landing strip. You're not going to just go in and land at that strip if you have enough fuel. You're going to circle first to see what's going on with that. And this is like seeing the landing strip, and this is like circling and coming up with the next best step. So the best approach to take is this, but it takes a moment of processing, and that moment can be a half second. What you don't want is for the reaction to equal your response, because then you've wasted this potential half second, and you may think it may feel like an eternity from the time you get your reaction to the time you do the action. A half a second is nothing. If you're speaking and you pause for a second like I'm doing right now, that is nothing. If I pause for 2 seconds, it's still nothing. It's just a normal pause. So it doesn't matter if you take an extra half second. So I say, yeah, take that half second and take another half second if you need it to emotionally modulate. So in here you want to pause, you want to prioritize, and you want to use next best steps. And that's where we get into these different phases. So the phases turn a vague reaction into a controllable sequence. This is where I go from summary to elements so that you can actually make changes. This is what I was talking about earlier. You want simplicity on the other side of complexity, not on this side. You don't want just a hack. You want to actually understand it. And by looking at it in phases, I have levers here. I have levers for here. I have levers for here. I have levers for here, here, and here. And in the handoff. This is the thing we can't control, but we can influence these with the levers and drivers that I'm talking about. Same with this. We can influence these phases with the levers and drivers. And then this handoff is to action step. The action step, remember, step 6. But part of that handoff is an assessment of where am I emotionally? Do I need to do some emotional modulation? And then here you have the phases to influence the outcome. So, which I just talked about. You can create intention, Knowledge creates intention, conditioning creates automaticity. Under pressure, you don't rise to intention, you fall to conditioning. So we need insights are great, knowledge is great, but you want to condition because you're going to fall to the level of conditioning, not rise to the level of your intention under stress. This is the attentional priming. This is what MacGyver used to do. The writer of the hit series, television series MacGyver, he used attentional priming to get him to come up with these crazy scenarios that the main character MacGyver would go into. And he would, what does a win look like? This is how, and he would frame this and give it to his subconscious to come up with an answer at 7 o'clock tonight while I go do something else. The intentional priming part of it is you're going to do something else. I do this with skiing and snowboarding. I'll go out and I'll have a specific thing I'm working on. Sometimes I'll record content while I'm skiing and snowboarding just to have something to do. And in recording that content, I'm actually exploring and finding new things that I hadn't thought about because I'm doing something completely different. It's not the exact same thing, but he would go ride a bicycle, hike, run, whatever, go to a movie, something unrelated to the thing he's trying to figure out. And he comes back at 7 o'clock or 5 o'clock, whatever time he gave it. And the more you do it, the better it gets. I've used this process to come up with strategies, and I'd say I need to figure this out. So I go live every day. It forces me to use attentional priming because I need a topic. I don't want to say the same thing every day. So I need a new topic to talk about, and I'll use attentional priming to do that. Then this one, so that's more of a big picture. That's over hours. Automaticity, the rapid optioning, is doing that same thing. I'm using that same kind of principle here. We're doing it here. We're forcing the network of neurons to go through rapid optioning so it doesn't just hand off some reaction based on the path of least resistance. It hands off a reaction to the conscious mind based on this. Define what's the real problem. So literally, you can get signals, you can get the messaging from your network of neurons. What's the real problem? What are two possible options? Recommend next best steps based on ease and effectiveness, and then you execute, act, reassess, and iterate. So this side here would be on the conscious mind, the response, but these three are done in the network of neurons. But as you execute, act, and recess, this is how iterative development, iterative refinement, this is how it's going to work because you're going to keep doing, you're not just reacting to some stimulus, you're building some options based on the stimulus aligned with your purpose and quest. And then another one I like is the two-axis matrix. You'll see me do that sometimes in here, and these are just some. There's hundreds, but as soon as I feel like something is complex, or we're getting off track, or maybe having some trouble understanding it, what I'll do is go to this. Hold on, and I'll just grab a piece of paper. I've done this in sales when a person is feeling like when a person is feeling like uh, they're having some difficulty understanding it. I'll just quickly pull this out. Well, I think what we're talking about is two things. We're talking about the what and the how. So first we need to think about what is it that you want to do? What is it that you want to get out of this? And then we'll deal with the how. But when you conflate those two and try to do how and what at the same time, you're going to run into some challenges. Another one I'll use often is effectiveness and efficiency, as you saw on the slide. And another one that I'll do is uh, profit and growth. If you're in business, a business owner, and you're seeing salespeople come in, they always are talking about growing and revenue over here. Well, you got to pay for that out of profit. So you don't just overweight here. These are the what Warren Buffett talks about. When the tide goes out, you'll see who's not wearing any pants. And the point is, yeah, you can focus on growth, but make sure you're paying attention to profit too. That's just an example, but I like to do this to uh, and there's just some more that you can use, but there's many more. The point is, as you get better as you get familiar with this, you'll do it automatically. And this is a very, very quick way to get people off the edge of the cliff. When people are going down this path, the house is on fire, everything is bad, just do this. If you're feeling internal load coming up, you can just do this. You just figure it out, and you can actually have your network of neurons do part of this as your rapid optioning. You could literally have that as part of it. So it's giving you what are the two axes for my two axis matrix. Or autonomy, alignment, accountability, psychological safety, discounting lifetime value, customization, scalability. These are polars that come up all the time in business conversations. And to have a set of guiding principles to go with this makes it even easier. It works even better because now you go back to your guiding principles, and the guiding principles, well, yeah, going after growth 100% is not going to align with our need to be able to have a strong balance sheet or whatever it is. And then there's mental rehearsal. So, mental rehearsal, this is what I'll be talking about next week. Mental rehearsal is thought of usually as visual. It's actually two channels. You have visual, which and emotional and linguistic, and all of this could be thought of as visualization, and that's a huge um, source of agency and personal leadership. And then there's strategies, implementation, intentions, and mental contrasting, and I'll get in. And I would say that if I had two tools that I could use, the number one tool I would use for designing in the field of infinite possibilities and just creating high performance while I'm in coherence, while I'm regulated, I would say visualization is my most powerful tool. And I would say if I needed to get back to regulation or back to coherence, breathing, breath work, different kinds of breath work is my most powerful tool. And both of those I leverage anchoring. So it's not just breathing to be breathing. It's not just visualizing to be visualizing. I'm building resources internally. So if I get hit with something unexpected, I have anchors. I can go back to breathing a certain way, and that anchors me into that state, or I can go to a quick picture and that anchors that. It's also how I change habits. Visualization is a very, very good source. That's where I would start, which is why I'll talk about it next week as the in the final part of this uh, four pillars of self-mastery. And I go, hold on a second. So each week I go live on LinkedIn, but every day, Monday to Thursday, I go live on channels. If you go to Facebook, you have 7 performance areas. You have Morris Maduro, neural change practitioner, and you have transformation after 50. So those are some Facebook pages that support some of my initiatives. And then I also have the YouTube channel by that same name, Transformation After 50, that supports my podcast that I use by that same name. And then I do a summary because each day is a different topic, and I pull them together as a summary on LinkedIn. And I do that Friday mornings, usually at 7 o'clock Pacific time. So here's the bottom line: the world's going to keep moving fast, and uncertainty is not going away. But humans are built to adapt. When we stay regulated, think clearly, and act deliberately, agency is not motivation, it's a trained capability. The ability to maintain coherence under pressure, choose the next best step, and execute before the window closes. The doors will open in the next chapter for people who are ready to move. Your job is to stay coherent enough and regulated enough to see them, and decisive enough to walk through the door. So that's it. I will see you on Monday.